At 11 p.m. on July 2nd, General Meade convened a meeting in the building he was using as a headquarters. Present were his Chief of Staff, Dan Butterfield, John Newton, who had taken command of the 1st Corps, Winfield Scott Hancock, currently commanding the 2nd and 3rd Corps, as well as the Army's right wing, John Gibbon, commanding the 2nd Corps for Hancock, David Birney, commanding the 3rd Corps for Hancock, George Sykes, commanding the 5th Corps, John Sedgwick, commanding the 6th Corps, Oliver Howard, commanding the 11th Corps, Henry Slocum, commanding the 12th Corps and the Army's left wing, Alpheus Williams, commanding the 12th Corps for Slocum, and the Chief Engineer, Gouverneur Warren, who, exhausted by the day's heroics, fell asleep in the corner. Arriving late was the cavalry commander, Alfred Pleasanton. After some rambling discussions, Butterfield got the meeting down to the business at hand.
Under existing circumstances, is it advisable for this Army to remain in its present position or to retire to another nearer its base of supplies?
By all means, shift our corps, but under no circumstances should we turn tail.
I think we ought to wait.
I think we should stay too.
I agree with General Williams.
Correct the position of the Army, but don't retreat. The way they're deployed now is poor. This is no place to fight a battle.
Yes, remain.
Consolidate the troops on this field. Don't give up this damn field.
This Army can't retreat.
I think we should stay and fight it out.
It being determined to remain in present position, shall the Army attack or await the attack of the enemy?
In my opinion, this Army is in no condition to attack.
Let's wait and let them attack us first.
I don't know about an attack. The 3rd Corps is badly chewed up and cannot continue to fight.
By no means attack.
Wait.
Wait for the enemy to attack until 4 p.m. and then reconsider.
We can't attack unless our communications are cut.
I think we should wait.
If we wait for the Army to attack, how long do we wait?
Hold until they advance.
I say one more day.
I agree with General Gibbons. I don't think we should attack either and wait for their move.
If we give them time, they can cut our lines.
One day.
If the enemy does not attack us, then we must attack the enemy.
We can't be idle. We can't wait too long. If we wait too long, we gotta move. We must attack.
I think we should wait one more day and see if the rebels will attack, but given the condition of our troops, I don't think we dare risk an attack.
Gentlemen, we shouldn't wait longer than a day.
It's decided then. We stay and fight. Thank you, gentlemen. That will be all. Good evening.
As the meeting broke up and officers returned to their commands, Meade collared John Gibbon, whose troops held the center of the line on Cemetery Ridge. He had a prophetic warning for Gibbon.
John, General Lee attacks tomorrow. It will be on your front.
What makes you say that?
Because he's attacked both our flanks today and he has been repulsed on both flanks. If he attacks tomorrow, it will be on your line. Make your dispositions accordingly. Thank you. Good night.
The first Confederate attacks the next day actually fell on the Union right, as the Union 12th Corps troops, returning from the Little Round Top area, tried to retake their trenches at the base of Culp's Hill. The Confederates, unable to retreat and unable to stay put, attacked. For 4 hours, the battle raged. Lee was upset that this fight had started. His plan had called for a coordinated assault between Longstreet's men, now reinforced by George Pickett's division, in the center, and Ewell's men on Culp's Hill. But the Yankees had started the shooting on the Union right, and by the time it was over, Ewell's divisions had been shot to pieces. Longstreet would have to go it on his own. Longstreet himself was not happy. He had been arguing from the start that a march around Meade's flank was preferable to fighting at Gettysburg. When he heard Lee's plan, he tried again to convince his commander of his idea.
General, I've had my scouts out all night. We have an excellent opportunity to move around Meade's army to the right and force him into engaging us.
General, the enemy is over there, and I'm going to strike him.
He then asked Lee how many men he planned to make the assault with. When Lee answered about 15,000, Longstreet again registered his disapproval.
General, I've been a soldier all my life. I've engaged in battle with men in squads, couples, companies, divisions, regiments, armies. So I know what a soldier can do. And I tell you that no 15,000 men so deployed can take that position.
Sir, I tell you we're going to take that position.
Lee's idea was a head-on assault straight at the Federal center with an overwhelming attack. He believed his hard-hitting Virginians could punch through anything. To prepare the way for them, he ordered Longstreet to assemble the artillery. Longstreet passed this assignment along to E. Porter Alexander, who had often distinguished himself in battle and who Longstreet clearly trusted. Alexander collected a total of 170 guns, posting them nearly the entire length of Seminary Ridge. Each had 120 to 130 rounds of ammunition. They were to concentrate their fire on the center of the Union line to soften the defenses there for the infantry. Alexander was instructed by Longstreet to inform Pickett of the best moment to advance. Thus, the responsibility for beginning the greatest infantry charge the war had seen thus far fell to a 27-year-old artillery battalion commander. At 1 p.m. in the afternoon of July 3rd, 2 signal guns announced the opening of the bombardment. Soon the air was filled with iron death, and Seminary Ridge became alive with the flaming muzzles of the massed guns. Eventually, the Federal artillery answered with 80 guns posted on Cemetery Ridge. The roar and crash were deafening and continued for 2 hours. Shortly after the guns opened on Seminary Ridge, the thunder of hooves was heard 3 miles east of Gettysburg. Jeb Stuart and his 6,300 troopers had worked their way around to the rear of the Union position and were probing for a weak spot. They were met by the Federal cavalry. 3 brigades, about 4,500 men, under George Custer and David Gregg, stood between Stuart and his objective. They sparred initially with dismounted troopers. Stuart threw the 1st Virginia at the Yankees in a mounted charge. The Bluecoats answered with a charge by the 7th Michigan that stopped the Confederates cold. Not willing to accept this setback, Stuart committed most of Wade Hampton's brigade. As they came across the open plain, Custer was ordered in, leading the 1st Michigan and shouting, "Come on, you Wolverines!" Custer crashed into the head of Stuart's column. The fighting swirled about in a saber-swinging melee. Then additional Federal troops slammed into the sides of the Gray Line, and the Confederates gave way. 3 hours of fighting had cost the Confederates more than 200 men, and the Yankees about the same. But Stuart would pose no threat to the drama unfolding on Cemetery Ridge. The artillery duel continued unabated, but Pickett's troops, positioned behind the Confederate batteries, were getting the worst of it. More than 500 men were killed or wounded before the assault ever began. Union batteries on Cemetery Hill were taking a pounding as well. General Henry Hunt, the Union artillery chief, knew an infantry assault was coming. To lure the Confederates into starting, he ordered the Federal batteries to cease fire, and the battered guns on Cemetery Hill replaced by fresh batteries from the artillery reserve. Porter Alexander, concerned about ammunition running low, noticed the Federals withdrawing the damaged batteries from Cemetery Hill and the reduction in the Federal volume of fire, and hastily scribbled a note to Pickett. "The 18 guns have been driven off. For God's sake, come quick, or we cannot support you. Ammunition nearly out." Pickett was with Longstreet when the messenger arrived. Longstreet still had little confidence in the success of the charge and was in a surly mood.
Colonel Pickett, sir, message for you. General, shall I advance? Lead my division forward. Sir. Yeah, go. Yeah.
The Southern troops passed through the guns, realigned their ranks, and advanced in parade ground precision towards the Union position. 10,500 men from the divisions of Pickett and James Pettigrew moved out in silence. Their appearance awed the Federals. First Lieutenant Frank Haskell of the 6th Wisconsin later wrote an inspired account of the sight.
Every eye could see his legions, an overwhelming, resistless tide of an ocean of armed men sweeping upon us. Regiment after regiment and brigade after brigade moved from the woods and rapidly took their places in the lines forming the assault. More than half a mile their front extends. More than 1,000 yards the dull gray masses deploy. Man touching man, rank touching rank, and line supporting line. Barrel and bayonet gleam in the sun, a sloping forest of flashing steel. Right on they move, as with one soul, in perfect order, without impediment of ditch or wall or stream, over ridge and slope, through orchard and meadow and cornfield, magnificent, grim, irresistible.
As the gray lines approached the Union position, the left flank came under the fire of the 8th Ohio, who had been placed in an exposed position forward of the line. The undersized Ohio regiment brought the Confederate left to a complete halt. On the Confederate right, a brigade of Vermont troops under George Stannard swept forward from their position, swung right, and poured a destructive fire into the southern flank. With the flanks thus stalled, the troops in the rear herded towards the center. There, the fire of Alexander Webb's 1,700 men was withering, and men dropped by the score. Suddenly, Confederate General Lewis Armistead led a small group of men in a desperate surge to the angle in the stone wall. As they rushed forward, Armistead shouted, "Come on, boys, give 'em cold steel. Who will follow me?" Over the wall they went. As Armistead touched a Federal artillery piece, he went down, mortally wounded. Those who had followed him were all soon killed, wounded, or captured. The Federals rushed reinforcements to the spot. One North Carolina unit penetrated the Federal line even further than Pickett's Virginians had, and the fighting was desperate and brutal. The Federals had broken the momentum of the assault well before they had reached the wall. There was no support coming from Seminary Ridge, even as the few who succeeded clung to their advanced positions. Slowly, in twos and threes, and then in ever-increasing numbers, the Confederates began drifting back to Seminary Ridge. The field they had crossed lay covered with death and destruction. Pickett had lost nearly half his division, and Pettigrew even more. Of the 10,500 that started, nearly 6,000 failed to return. General Meade's son, a captain serving on his staff, was with his father when the word came that the assault had been repulsed.
Retreating, sir. Thank God for that. Huzzah!
General Armistead lay dying inside Union lines. He was discovered there by several Union officers. He asked to see his old friend, Winfield Hancock. When informed that Hancock had been wounded, he gave over his watch to be delivered to him. He would die the next day in a Federal hospital. As the beaten troops of Pickett and Pettigrew returned to the Confederate lines, General Lee rode out to meet them and tried to assure them that it was not they, but he who had failed.
I'm sorry. Man, you fought nobly and it's all my fault. I'm sorry. You really fought nobly. I'm sorry. It's all my fault. It's all my fault. I'm sorry.
The final action was a futile and disastrous charge by General Elon Farnsworth of the Federal Cavalry. Ill-conceived and brashly executed, Farnsworth and a third of his command were killed. His was the final act in the gruesome drama that was Gettysburg. In 3 days of mighty combat, the two armies had sustained over 50,000 killed, wounded, or missing. The outcome was militarily a draw. While the Confederates had clearly triumphed on the first day and had gained ground on the second, they had just as clearly failed on the third day. The Union Army remained in its positions, and Lee's men were in no condition to attack again. Both armies lay facing each other throughout the day on July 4th. Neither could attack, and neither would withdraw. The suffering of the wounded was immeasurable. The heavens opened up and a drenching rain fell, as if attempting to rinse the blood from the ground. Finally, after putting a wagon train of wounded 17 miles long in motion towards Virginia, Lee ordered his men to withdraw. Bloodied but still dangerous, the Southern veterans turned sullenly south. Meade pursued weakly, and the Army of Northern Virginia returned home safely. The town of Gettysburg became one vast hospital. Overworked doctors labored without rest to treat the ceaseless flow of wounded and dying men who were brought to them. They were aided by a large number of women who rushed to the scene to help out. A contingent of the Sisters of Mercy, volunteers of the U.S. Sanitary Commission, forerunner to the Red Cross, and local Samaritans all pitched in. It was grisly and disheartening work. The courage of the women in the midst of such horror was impressive. It was left to them to pick up the pieces when the smoke of battle had passed and the armies had marched away. The recollections of one woman were typical.
There was a colonel in a shoe shop, a captain just up the street, and a private round the corner, whose young sister had possessed herself of him, overcoming the military rules in some way, and carrying him off to a little room, all by himself, where I found her doing her best with very little. We had on an average 60 of such men each night for 3 weeks under our care. Sometimes 100, sometimes only 30. 16,000 good meals were given. Hundreds of men kept through the day, and 1,200 sheltered at night. Their wounds dressed, their supper and breakfast secured, rebels and all. The clothing we reserved for our own men, except now and then when a shivering rebel needed it. But in feeding them we could make no distinction. It was curious to see how our workers at the lodge, the disgust and horror felt for rebels giving place to the kindest feelings for wounded men. Men whose strong patience it was very hard to bear, dying with thoughts of the old home far away, saying, as last words for the women watching there, and waiting with a patience equal in its strength, "Tell her I love her."